hall is sponsored by Gale. Sarah Caroline Perret is currently senior researcher at the chair at École Normale Supérieure in Geopolitics of Risk in Paris, where she co-organizes a public multidisciplinary seminar dedicated to technologies and uncertainties. Her current research focuses on questions of nationality in anti-terrorism policies implemented in France and United States since the 2000s. Please welcome her for a much-required talk on risk management and artificial intelligence.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you again. I really would like to warmly thank the organizers of the Times Literature Festival, but also the Institut Français for having invited me for this wonderful event. I have to say it's my first time in India, and I feel very honored to be here for this specific occasion. So I'm very happy to come here to talk here about artificial intelligence and risk management. Firstly, I think it's important to precise that I am a political scientist, a specialist of international relations and security policy. So I'm not a technical expert in terms of artificial intelligence, but it's still something that we have to think about in our societies. So regarding my research specialties, it doesn't seem initially to be directly related to our today's subject, but when you start to work on the evolution of legislative measures in Europe, in my case, or how those measures take place empirically on the field, you understand that technology has become an avoidable subject. From this observation, many questions emerge when we want to understand the relationship between artificial intelligence and risk management in a context of security issue. First series of questions. First series of questions are, of course, on how define those terms. What is artificial intelligence? What is a risk today? What does it mean to manage risk? Second series of questions. What are the relationship between AI and risk management? How is AI affected risk management? Does AI help to improve the management of contemporary risks? Or does it generate new risks? Does AI represent a threat or a technological tool to respond to old and new threats? And finally, I will also present a third series of questions here. For who or what are we talking here about risk? Why shall we reflect on these questions? Does artificial intelligence is a security tool or a new domain of risk? And I will stop here because, as you see, this subject raises a lot of undoubtedly questions. So let's try then at least to respond very briefly to the main ones here. The definitional aspect first. So the definitional aspect seems to me to be a very important issue here. Indeed, artificial intelligence became, since few recent years, a very fashionable topic, if I can say it. It fascinates as much as it scares. It raises many fantasies and fears. That is why it is important to remind what this terminology actually designates here. Especially because the term of artificial intelligence is often associated with other very technical and or maybe obscure terms for the layman or the uninitiated. And I'm sure you all have been already confronted to that terms once. Maybe we could show some examples here, like neural networks or synapses, supervising learning, machine learning, deep learning, predictive algorithms, transhumanism, bio and nanotechnologies, etc., etc. I will not present all the very different definitions that experts have suggested, but at least a common definition can be presented here of artificial intelligence. So it is broadly admitted that artificial intelligence designates all the techniques and theories that are set up to provide machines capable of simulating human intelligence. Machine here has to be understood as an automatic system related to computer sciences, rather than more a physical aspect or object. So we can here highlight important statements. Artificial intelligence is not new, but as old as development of computer science. The first artificial intelligence was basically a chess game. Artificial intelligence is very much dependent of the human intelligence. And finally, we can also highlight something I find important. It is not necessarily a robot. And I know the idea or the representation that we can have on artificial intelligence is very often connected to the idea it's basically maybe a humanoid or a robot. Regarding the understanding of the notion of risk, the basic definition will be the possibility of a danger or at a threat happens, the probability of damage that may be avoided by a preventive action or at least minimized through an insurance dispositive. We forget sometimes that security is not only about protection, but also about insurance of prevent any kind of threats. For example, the car insurance manages the risks related to the situations that could have identified as a danger, car accidents or dangerous individual behavior, like driving faster than the limitation, etc. Those examples are then anticipated, estimated as a probability. Then let's go back to the second series of questions. Here, artificial intelligence has helped a lot to calculate and anticipated what situations or behavior could be identified as risk. This relationship is explained by something I will qualify as motor. And according to me, it raises also new issues. This motor is the strength of solutionism. The technology solutionism is now worldwide and generates new behaviors and in the same time new risks. Indeed, in our globalized and interconnected world, we are witnessing a real race for innovation and mastery of what is called deep artificial intelligence. Let me try to explain a bit what I'm talking about here. Deep learning is basically a subset of machine learning, and machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. So machine learning is the step after the traditional artificial intelligence that are able to operate some changes, generally by self-correcting small errors in their system, without human intervention. This is basically an algorithm algorithmic optimization here. The deep learning is the step after that. It is the step when the artificial intelligence, again, as an automatical system here, so it is the step after that, which is still capable of changes, but also they are able to learn about what it works and what it doesn't. It is basically, I think we can say that, our current state of art. What is important to understand here is that corrective and learning capacities have been defined by an algorithm thinking and developed by a human. It is still basically a myth to talk about completely autonomous technologies or machines. Those machines have been confectioned by humans' representations. That is to say, and this is something that we, I think, reflect on, that is to say that sometimes with the same misperception of something, which is particularly important to take into account when we are talking about managing risk through artificial intelligence. But I will come back very soon on that specific aspect later. Finally, the third series of questions. We saw how the relationship between artificial intelligence and managing risk raises security matters, but also ethical and societal ones. And especially because it concerns more and more directly citizens. Internet democratization and development through what we used to call the GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, in the very beginning of the 21st century, allowed here in the same time the artificial intelligence democratization. I will not question if it's a good or bad situation, but why it appears essential to reflect about how managing risk of such fast artificial intelligence innovation race, especially when artificial intelligence are more and more used as weapons or security responses. So now, let's go more on the aspects of the relationship between technologies and risk in societies. And here, I will talk about technology innovations in risk societies. Risk societies as a concept. When I talk about risk societies, I'm referring here, of course, to Ulrich Beck and in his concept of risk society. The famous German sociologist was already able to identify in the 80s how the question of risk through the development of technologies will become more and more central in the society's structuration. He pointed out one of the paradoxes of modernization. These paradoxes are, for him, the idea of, by multiplying the technological solutions to the human problems, one makes, of course, life easier, but at the same time, more complex and thus more uncertain. So in the context of security here, we can then observe three main lines to reflect on think the question of innovative technologies like artificial intelligence. First, private and public decision-making processes that support and legitimate security innovation. Second, security understood as technological innovation, and the tension between the public sphere and its own perception and acceptance of security technologies. Third and finally, the democratic and ethical suppositions and implications of the innovation as an ideal of governance. In these three main lines of thinking security and technology at the same time, we would have to take into account here the main actors involved. Who are the main actors involved here? Of course, technologists, industrialists, at least those who technically developed those technologies and innovations, but also citizens, policymakers, governments. Because I think it is important to remember that the legitimacy of the contemporary state, and when I say a contemporary state, as I'm thinking about as organizational system, entity, still relies heavily on its ability to ensure the security of its citizens. What formerly Max Weber called the monopoly of legitimate physical violence still exists in many democratic systems, in many democratic states. So in the context of security, both citizens and policymakers are very important to take into account here. In order to illustrate this, I suggest having a look on the terrorist issue, which is also my expertise, and that's why I wanted to try to connect those issues, because they are very connected here. So let's have a look on terrorism and also on the responses adopted to fight it. In the same time of globalization of terrorism, the past 2 decades have seen a large expansion of counterterrorism policies at the global level. Of course, I'm thinking about United Nations, for instance, and of course at the national level. And I'm more a specialist of the United States context and European context here. So, of course, I will think about specifically those 2 examples here in my demonstration. So among the new measures adopted as these different levels, some included to fund and allow technology innovations in order to fight terrorism. Some familiar examples: the implementation of smart borders based on the collection and transmission of individual data, the extension of surveillance tools. We can think of facial recognition, for instance, or also the control of social networks. It is also a very important way to implement surveillance in this sense for states. So the question of the use of the artificial intelligence to fight terrorism is also related to the money tracking. And I'm thinking especially of the last international conference in Paris, No Money for Terror, in last April, who was actually focusing his work, and that was the President Macron, who invited 72 countries to try to find solutions to track funding of terrorism here. At the end of the day, the effectiveness of such measures is not yet well proved, since countries like in Europe, in Africa, and of course I'm thinking in India, are still facing terrible attacks. It's a fact. But what is sure is that these measures are impacting the democratic societies and their citizens, especially in the very fragile balance between security and liberty. Here I'm talking about human rights, rule of law, who are actually directly affected by these technological measures that have been think and built from cognitive bias. What I'm thinking here is about the fact that those technologies have also learned about our own bias, gender bias, also origin bias, religion bias, skin color bias, etc. So here we can understand that managing terrorist risk became what the French scholar Didier Bigot calls a management of freedom, technology, surveillance paradox. That is to say, when technology fails of surveillance tasks, we still continue to reduce freedom in the name of security by more technologies. This is the paradox that he identifies. But terrorism risk appears different than any other type of risk. Again, risk means the possibility of a danger or an occurrence of an undesirable event, more or less profitable, and therefore foreseeable. But we all know that the risk of a terrorist attack is obviously not an object of risk like the others, because it is deeply marked by uncertainty, that is to say, unpredictable. And it is precisely what I think is destabilizing citizens, politicians, and legislators. Indeed, uncertainty is different than risk because it's inevitable to us as a chronic component of the human condition, actually, or as tragic quality of temporality, means that the study of uncertainty occupies a pivotal position between the human sciences and the natural sciences. And for hard sciences, uncertainty remains an obstacle to overcome or manage, when its social sciences, in the social sciences, the uncertainty concept demands moral analysis of the question of action here. So terrorist risk and terrorist threat actually is fueled by the uncertainty of population, uncertainty about an unknown future, uncertainty about the state and the forces of order, and uncertainty about the other, about our fellow man. The ability to frighten, to create terror, depends fundamentally on the unreality of danger here. And this unreality of danger is also challenging the ability to appeal to imagination, suspicion. More than other objects, terrorism, by its nature, operates with a logic of fear, anxiety, on its targeted audience. This terror pushes here government to respond to this very heterogeneous terror practice. And when I'm talking about I will do that, heterogeneous practice, I'm thinking about really the modus operandi here. The feeling of insecurity produced by the terrorist threats comes to challenge the traditional social pact of the citizens, based again on the balance of freedom and security. Solutionism has come as an immediate response. Technology innovations included types of artificial intelligence have been developed and applied without really be think in its own effects. Without the risk that could generate and that could have been anticipated here. The feeling of insecurity produced by the terrorist threat comes to challenge the traditional social pact, as I said, and here it's something that we really should have to take into account. Let me provide you an example. When a drug is created, it is tested first, and then the secondary risks are identified and anticipated before putting it on the market. The temporality here of technological innovation and its application in the context of the fight against terrorism questions here here need this essential reflexive phase to prevent those risks. As an example, this counter-terrorism and counter-radicalization policies based on artificial intelligence creates new social risks. Indeed, I recently published with 3 other European scholars the first quantitative study on the social effects of these policies in France. Our study reveals clearly a discriminatory impact on one specific group, which is Muslims, in France at least. And this discrimination actually pushes this population to change their behavior in their relations with institutions or with media, for instance. So in conclusion, I think it is important to take into account that innovation and artificial intelligence in general are generating inevitably new risks, that humans have the responsibility to anticipate for their own good, even in a competitive world. That is why the use of development of artificial intelligence and innovative technology needs to be more controlled, or at least limited, when they become a risk of generating new risks here. But a responsible innovation could also contribute to improve the effectivity of counterterrorism policies, for instance, and of security issues in general. In this sense, I agree with the philosopher Peter Burgess. The notion of responsibility can be regarded as an object of innovation itself. As Stilgoe, Owen, and McNaghan have highlighted in 2013, innovation implies an additional innovation of anticipating the social impact of yet unseen and still unforeseeable products of innovations. Solutions can be found through the reflexivity that Ulrich Beck already suggested. Imagining the consequences in order to be able to anticipate these new risks. That is the reflection that we should have. In this sense, imagination is very human quality, and this Today Festival, I think, is a very good example, because I think at the end of the day, and as science fiction has proved it, authors, writers, artists are the best to imagine the risks of tomorrow. Thank you very much for your attention. So I'm ready for questions, if you have some.
It is not going to cause any. Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, yeah. Anything to.
We have to anticipate that risk.
No danger to society, because in relation to literature, what you said is very important. That any confusions people are using, which they are using in religion or races or another thing. So R&D people, what they are doing. So few people with their own intelligence in relation to the innumerable number of intelligences in the world. So that may be accumulated along with this, and this is going to make you, like if you are doing R&D and I'm using your concept. So artificial intelligence is going to bring it out, and the repercussions, what I'll get profits from somebody, say, so I will have to give to you also, because artificial intelligence will be the one display which will keep on going everywhere, either in relation to literature or in defense or in anything. You mean you're using, you are told all the streams of life. So using this, I wrote some thing. So these repercussions are related.
Sorry. What is your question?
My question is, I'm congratulating you. This is, I'm congratulating you, and
Thank you.
You were saying that it may pose any danger in the IP. IP is going to be the best subject, and it will not pose any. This is going to do away with the confusion. Say I say a prose, or say I say anything of Wordsworth, or I say anything of any Shastra of this, and I don't know the full knowledge of that, and I may use on the other member. The artificial intelligence and all, they may display immediately that thing, and I won't be able to misuse anything. I congratulate you on your R&D and these people.
Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Ma'am, my question is, what is AI doing to, let's say in the field of agriculture? How can we manage risk in the field of agriculture using AI? Is there any work being done on this?
Sorry, can you repeat it?
In the agriculture sector, how can we use AI to minimize risk? Because we have all sort of risk in agriculture.
So I'm not a specialist of that specific topic, but I know AI are very large use now in some countries by helping to minimize exactly the risks for agriculture people. But in this very precisely way, it's actually AI is a tool, a relevant tool. It helps to improve our practice in very specific way. What I was talking about was more something of globalized AI, and I had this view on geopolitical aspects. That's why. But I think, as I said in my presentation, I'm not here to say AI is good or bad. It's not the purpose here. because there is good in AI, but there is also bad in AI. And I think our responsibility is to think about the risks that it will be generated by this new technology, in able to anticipate and to improve those new technology.
I really liked your conceptual note. I think it's more conceptual, and I understand how you brought Max Weber into it in terms of violence. The worrying part, and that's my question, is can you actually control innovation? Because innovation is an uncontrollable runaway train. And I think you brought that up. As you get smarter and smarter, Ibsen, the theatre man, and Munch on the Nordic side, they've always talked about how how human beings are becoming far too intelligent for themselves. And that is the real risk. So how do you want to go about this? There is no way you can stop society from becoming more and more risky because they're always trying to outdo the other part of the other society. So we have a problem there in innovation not being, is uncontrollable. I mean, so would you like to?
Thank you for that question. I think here in this sense, it's basically like globalization. Globalization, we cannot completely control it, like AI or innovations, of course. But at least we can regulate it. We can build some defense of, well, at least in a rule of law state, by maybe laws, or by maybe new institutions to have the ability to control it. I was taking, for instance, the example of the drugs. When you take a drug because you're sick, you know that you will have the risk listed in the box, so you are aware about that because that has been controlled, tested, etc. Maybe we could do something similar. This drug was authorized by institutions, by authorities. So maybe we should improve our control institutions here.
Yeah, but there's competition in the market.
Yes.
Markets are different.
Yes, so it's basically like in the economy in general. It's a matter of how the governments and states are able to manage the market. That's why it's also, and it's what I was saying, it's also the responsibility of citizens.
So you're not in favor of laissez-faire?
Sorry?
You're not in favor of laissez-faire?
No.
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 Thank you.
Short answer.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hello.
Ma'am, welcome to India.
Thank
And
you.
my question is, how artificial intelligence can play a crucial role in future international relation dynamics?
In what, sorry?
In future international relations dynamics. In future international relations dynamics.
International relations. Sorry.
Thank you.
It's a tough question. It's a good one. It's a tough question. I mean, it depends how you conceptualize international relations, how you think about international relations. A realistic perspective will say, okay, international relations are based on conflictuality between states. So at the end of the day, it's the matter of security and defense. So of course, we all know that it's a big issue and probably one biggest cause of the competition in, well, innovative competition in worldwide. So it depends how the states and more the states and the governments are thinking about international relations. If you are thinking as a more liberal, and I'm talking about liberal in theoretically speaking in international relations. That is to say that for cooperation, basically, you could improve those measures by try to how I can say it, to exchange all this innovation in order to maybe stop some. I'm thinking about the remaining, the resurgences of old conflicts like territorial conflicts. For instance, Russia and Ukraine are a good example for that, because I'm thinking about the last recent event of those boats who were captured by Russian military. So all these matters are actually very close to the innovation technology, because they were able to take those boats because of the technology they were able to develop. But they kept this development for them in order to have an advantage. So this is, it's a very hard question to answer in this sense, because really it depends how you conceptualize international relation in this sense.
The problem with artificial intelligence, which I believe, is that it will lead to westernization of societies in the world. So what do you want to say over it?
I don't know if you think westernization of societies, for you, innovation is part of westernization of societies? No? So how do you understand that? You think it's because the westernization of societies, it's pushing to go further limits of innovations? I'm not sure to understand your question. I'm not, I cannot hear you, sorry.
Intelligence has no boundary, no nationality. So that's not so valid.
Now that question comes from a fear of the fact that industrialization was not necessarily an Indian innovation. And two,
okay.
that globalization is going to bring even worse monsters into the country. That's the background, I think, from the young man's idea.
What I wanted to say is that indulgence of Eastern societies is neglected so far from past 200 or 300 years a lot. Though that showcase that, yeah, we are integrating the world is becoming more and more peaceful and problems are getting solved. But so far, when you study all past trends of 300 and 400 years, when power has went to West, indulgence of Eastern societies is decreasing day by day, and they are being neglected.
Okay, I understand, but I'm not sure to agree with the idea of it's necessarily a Western thing. I mean, China is one of the top leader in innovative technologies, for instance. So I don't know if it's really related to that aspect.
It's probably the last question, I guess. So you brought up the very good points, engaging the government into the regulations of these new innovation. So one question is that how can we truly trust the artificial intelligence to make decisions on behalf of myself when we know that these technologies are invented by big corporations and government? How do we know they are not using our biases to give us the answers what we want to hear, not the true answers which we want to do? So
thank you for that question. I think you raised an important issue here. And actually, I realized that I forgot to mention that very important aspect is about trust. Trust is actually very important here. You're absolutely right. How I can trust something that seems uncontrolled?
Who can I trust? Who is regulating? Yeah, who's regulating?
That's why I try to be optimistic here and call for more responsibility, because I know we are all reasonable humans, and we know we can be more responsible in this sense as governments, and also not only governments, industrials have also big responsibilities, and I was thinking about the big internet companies, for instance. They have responsibility as well in this innovation race.
Does national guidelines or international guidelines are present? You're talking about risk management, right? Is anyone working on artificial intelligence, international guidelines, or national guidelines?
Yes.
Any of the top countries?
Yes, but the problem was, as I said, is the bias that we are, as a human, we are transmitted to the... I don't know if you understand bias, maybe. Bias is like your preconceptions, and sometimes your misrepresentation of something. And the thing is, we as a human, we does those algorithms, and we say for an algorithm, for instance, like smart border. You have in those systems, sometimes it depends the context, it depends the country, but in some countries, when you are from a specific country, you are automatically, because of the algorithm, identified as a potential risk. So why all person from a specific country will represent a risk? This is also a representation of what we are transmitted in those algorithms. And the French context, I think, is very interesting, because if you have a look on the facts, who does the terrorist attacks? It was not foreigners, it was French. So if you have a look on that, it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. Maybe the last question?
Yeah. Maybe I don't have a question as such, but I would like to add a small tail piece to what one question was. Somebody asked that whether adoption of AI would cause westernization of our very much Oriental society. Yes? So, yeah, so I have a tail piece to that. Well, I'm working in genomics. I'm just starting my career as a scientist, as a physician. And we have tried to correlate Ayurveda with genomics. Genomics is an inherently Western technology, as far as I believe, as of now. I'm not sure how ancient genomics must be in India, and we lost that knowledge. But then what we found that when we correlated the 3 pravrittis in Ayurveda, I'm not an Ayurveda specialist because I'm an MBBS doctor, but we still do that because we believe in integrative medicine. So what I found is that when you see the genomics of these people, you can find that certain genes go and fit in those pravrittis. And this has been published in Nature Medicine. So I believe that it will not lead to westernization. It is just how you point the scanner.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to add one point about one risk scenario, which in my view has not been stressed, which is when you have a machine talking to another machine, which is called computation. So when we were talking about governance, corporate control, in the upcoming scenario in innovation race that we are witnessing at the moment, we were speaking about the importance of the artists and the authors, about the forward-looking about the future. There is a scenario which we are assessing is when these gigantic machines are talking among each other, and at some point there is no control.
Actually, it reminds me a very good example when you had 2 chatbots. You know what is a chatbot, right? So 2 chatbots was discussing, I think, and they were influenced by a Twitter algorithm. And at the end of the day, both were talking about the fact that, oh, it's so cool to be a Nazi. Because they were part of a deep learning, so they are nourished by what they are learning on the internet. And at some point, we arrived at that point. I think this is a question for an engineer. Absolutely. But sometimes this is the worst of humanity, probably. Well, thank you so much again for your question. Very interesting question, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, audience, for being part of the session.